So, you're interested in running an open-world West Marches-style sandbox, but you don't know where to start. Well, today I will tell you how I ran mine quite successfully. Hey everyone, Trevor DeVal here, your intrepid host of Me, Myself, and I. If you do enjoy what I do here on this channel, please do hit like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Or if you want to become a member of the YouTube channel, you can do that below. Or join us on Patreon. All the stuff is below. Today, we are talking about the West Marches Sandbox-style game. Ooh, what is that, you may ask? Well, I will tell you. Or rather, I will tell you where you can go to find out much more information. Because this website right here, this blog post by Ben Robbins, I'm not sure when this was done, some time ago. This blog post really explains very well what the West Marches style of game is, so I do encourage you to go and check this one out because it will answer all of your questions. But suffice to say that my West Marches style game was basically this: an open world sandbox game, fantasy game, in which the players have total control over where to go and what to do, or what to attempt, and there are no pre-made storylines or pre-made plots or anything like that. The game revolves around three concepts. One, it is player-driven. Two, it is exploration-based. And three, in my particular versions of this West Marches style game, it is randomly determined. So let's get into it. So, player-driven, what does that mean? Well, just as a note, I'm talking about a GM with other human beings as opposed to solo play. Solo play in a West Marches style thing would be totally different, and I'll probably cover that at some point. But I'm talking about running a game for actual human beings, actual people out there in the world. So, player-driven. The first thing it means is that the players themselves are the ones who set the schedule. That's right. Normally it falls on us poor overworked GMs to do such things, but in the ideal version of the West Marches style, the players all get together via email or Discord or whatever, or in person sometimes. My God, in person, remember that? And they determine who's going to be around on the set day that the GM is running the game. Maybe it's Saturday afternoons or something like that. And then they tell the GM, okay, we've got a party of 5 players. We're ready to go on Saturday at 1 o'clock, or whenever the time that the GM sets is. Great. So the GM knows that he's got this group of 5 players that are going to come and play the game that day. You don't have to do anything as a GM. Haha, that's the ideal version. Very rarely works out that way, but that's the ideal. Basically, it means you're going to run the game for whoever you have. You're going to run the game for whoever shows up. Now, this can only work if within the game world, there is a starting point, a home base, a base of operations. Because you've got different party configurations every time you play, you always have to make sure that those player characters can start from the same base of operations. So if Jim and Jack go off on a quest, then at the end of their session, they have to get back to the base of operations. Because otherwise, the next Saturday comes along and Jim's around, but Jack isn't, but Jim really wants to play. We can't have Jim and Jack stranded out in the wilderness while Jim really wants to go and play with Joe, the wizard, and go explore something else, right? So you want to bring them back to their base of operations at the end of each session. Now, that may sound a little weird. That may sound a little arbitrary, but they're in the middle of a dungeon. They can't just suddenly leave. Well, they really can. And a great tool for allowing you to do that is from a little game called 5 Torches Deep. This is an OSR game, really, really simple, sort of a streamlined D&D game. But the rule that we're talking about today is the rolling to return rule. Love this rule. It's perfect for the West Marches. What it means is, if there's insufficient time to roleplay the party's return to a safe camp or back to base camp, back to their base of operations, the GM can have each player roll to return. This will depend on the system you're using. We were using Forbidden Lands in this particular system, so they would have to make a survival roll typically. If they succeeded, then at the end of the session, great, they're back to base camp. All is good. But if they failed, there's a consequence. Maybe they had to run out of the dungeon prematurely and they lost some gear, or they encountered some damage on the way and they were hurt by something. Whatever the case is, they can either get back fine, or they can get back missing some stuff, or they can get back hurt, or they can get back dead. That's a bad outcome, but it's possible. But the point is, this helps facilitate this sort of weirdly arbitrary idea that the player characters have to return to home base. Rolling to return. Very useful. Another benefit of having a home base of operations for all of your player characters to always return to is this provides a great place for them to bring on replacement characters if some of their characters die, which certainly did happen in my game. It's sort of a central keep, a central castle, whatever the case is, and it's assumed that this is where the newbies show up. So you could have a situation, like if you're playing old school D&D, you could have a situation where you've got really experienced player characters with much less experienced characters all in the same party. And that's perfectly fine because game balance doesn't exist in this particular style of game. It's out the window. The only balance is how do you balance your own choices to live or die based on where you choose to explore. So you could have like a 9th level fighter and a 5th level cleric and a 1st level thief all in the same party and it works fine. This is not necessarily the best kind of thing to use if you're using a quote unquote balanced system, but that's just my opinion. A crucial thing about the player driven game is that they have the freedom to do whatever they want. They have the freedom to explore wherever they want, to chase down any leads that they want, anything at all that their characters can attempt to do, they have the freedom to do. Now, because you don't have game balance, because you could have wildly disparate power levels among the characters, that means you're not going to have a situation where you're designing encounters for a particular level. Oh, this is a hex where it's just made for 5th level characters. No, none of that exists. The players could blunder into a dragon's lair at level 1 and be all wiped out. That is a possibility. So you as the GM have to make sure that you're giving them enough information that they can make meaningful choices. For example, if the characters blunder into a hex and you randomly determine, we're coming back to random determination very soon, but if you randomly determine that hex has a dragon's lair in it, then you want to make sure that there's enough warning signs for the players that they can make a meaningful choice to either leave, yes, leave, or to keep going. Keep going. Because a bunch of weak characters against the dragon are all dead, of course. However, hey, it's Sandbox, man. They can go if they want. But you as a GM have a responsibility to give them warning signs. So for example, they walk into a plains hex and you determine that there's a dragon's lair there. Well, it's probably a good idea as they enter the hex to sort of talk about the smoking ruin of a village over there and the fields have all been burned and maybe there was a merchant's caravan that's completely gutted. All the animals are dead and interestingly enough, all the bags of treasure have been mysteriously robbed or whatever. Or maybe there's a survivor of the village who says, no, the great beast came from the mountain over there in the middle of this hex that you really shouldn't be at, or something like that, right? So you give the players some warning signs so that they can make meaningful choices, because this whole Sandbox thing is about the players being able to make meaningful choices. The second concept is the West Marches game is exploration based. Now, you can do this a number of ways, but how I did it was I started with a blank map. Now, this particular map is the map of the Forbidden Lands that comes with the game. I just used the map because I was using the game system, but I wasn't using their world. The Forbidden Lands game comes with a really cool background and world and settings and cultures and all that kind of stuff. I basically didn't use virtually any of that. I just used the map. Why? Because I wanted a good solid baseline of geography to know. Now, you don't have to do that. You can randomly determine the hexes as the players enter them. You can do that in terms of what the geography is. Or you could create everything beforehand. You can do whatever you want. How I did it was I started with this map and I put them on a very specific part of that map. Boom, down here right at the bottom. And the only thing that they knew when they started on this map was this one hex. Basically, this was the only thing they could see. Everything else was black. And as they moved through the map, then I would reveal hex by hex what was in that. So they had no idea what was there. And, like over here, there's mountains, right? So I would obviously describe, well, you can see mountains in the far distance. If I was making this up as I went along, I wouldn't necessarily know that there were mountains to describe in the far distance. So I like to have the basic geography laid out in front of me. Now, this also became the group map. As they would progress through the game, the players had access to this map, so they could see exactly where they and their comrades had explored, because this was a communal map. It was a common map. And how that was sort of justified in the game was in the base of operations, which was right here, this Fort Drakendale place. It was basically the keep on the Borderlands from basic D&D. Even use the same maps. But how we justified this was in the tavern, there was a big oak table, and every time the characters would put more on the map, they would go to the tavern and they would draw physically on the table the map of their explorations. Now, the reason why this was cool is because every session had a different combination of players, right? Because they're the ones responsible for how they're going to organize their sessions. So you never know who's going to be there. So if Jim and Jack are on an adventure and they come back and they put something on the map, then Phil and Sue, when they come over, they see on the map, oh, something else has been added, and maybe that piques their interest. Maybe something is revealed on that map that those particular characters are interested in. Whatever the case is, it provides sort of a cool communal experience where people go, oh, wow, they all feel like they're part of this emerging world and discovering the hidden world that evolves in front of them. That actually brings me to something that's quite important that I didn't mention before, which is one of the core concepts of the West Marches game is that it takes place on a frontier. It takes place on a wilderness, on the edge of the wilderness, because the whole point of the game, being exploration-based, is that you've got to give them something to explore. So this map was perfect because basically the conceit of this particular game was that this land was cut off for centuries, and only now had people been allowed to sort of enter it, but no one knew what was out there. It was a complete mystery. The other thing about exploration-based adventuring is you have to keep really careful track of time. Your in-game calendar, you have to really keep an eye on who's doing what when, because if Jim and Jack go off to explore the Mountain's Eye over here, but the next week, Phil and Sue want to come and explore the Mountain's Eye, you kind of have to know where everybody is in terms of time. You know, like you want to know when this was explored, because if Phil and Sue are on a slightly different timeline, which can happen, maybe they go. So you want to know the state of every hex when players enter them. It's not particularly complicated to do, but you do have to keep an eye on it. You have to keep track of it. And now we come to the third concept, which is randomly created. Now, again, this is fully optional. You don't have to randomly create anything on the fly like I did. You can create the whole world beforehand if you want, and you can know exactly what's in every hex. You can do all that work if you want. I didn't want to do that because I didn't have the time to do that, and I wanted to explore the world with my players. Now, there's a couple of caveats about this, which I'm going to get to in a second. But let's talk about this idea of randomization. So because I'm randomly creating the world as we go, I had to pick my supplements. I love my supplements, my random supplements, most of which are for sale through DriveThruRPG via the links below. And if you purchase them from here, you help the channel. Look at that, lovely. But you do have to keep detailed notes, not only of the time, the calendar, but you have to keep detailed notes of the locations that the characters explore. There's a number of reasons for this. When you put something new on the map, when you're randomly determining something as you are going into the hex with the players, you want to keep in mind always the context of what has come before. You want to be looking for connections with other areas. You want to be inferring relationships with NPCs or NPC faction groups, and you want to be inferring a history of the world as well. What do I mean by this? Let's say that in one particular hex over here, let's say in this hex right there, boom, the players discovered that there used to be a dwarven civilization in the mountains. Great, okay. Then if they explore this hex and they find a collapsed mine that you randomly determine, then a collapsed mine, that actually is probably belonging to the dwarves. Now, not necessarily, but it gives you a good connection to start building a consistent world. Because if you go totally random, if you just completely randomly determine what's in every hex, yes, then this hex, you discover that there was a dwarven civilization in these mountains, and in this hex, there's a bunch of fairies that live in a broken down mine that has nothing to do with dwarves. I mean, you could do that, but if you do that, then the world could start to feel a little gonzo, like nothing makes sense and nothing is connected. That's not my style. I way prefer the players to have a feeling of verisimilitude, my players to have a feeling that the world makes sense and that there is some internal consistency and order to the world. And so because you're randomly creating it as you go, you have to sort of retroactively create that consistency, right? The other thing that's important is inferring relationships. So again, they come across this collapsed mine. You've assumed that it's part of the dwarves, but you also know that back at the castle, there's a dwarven armor smith who was very forlorn, you randomly determined. You didn't know why. Well, now you go, wait a minute, maybe he's forlorn because he was part of this great civilization that collapsed in the mountains, or maybe he lost his axe of smiting or something in the collapse of the mine. And that suggests a quest all of a sudden. Ooh, now the players have something to do. If they talk to the dwarf back in the town, the dwarf might actually say to them, oh, I see you went to this mine. I would really love it if you went inside and explored it and found my axe or whatever. It's a quest that makes itself apparent just by following this kind of procedure. So inferring relationships in the new discoveries is very important, as well as having a sense of history and inferring the history. As we just discovered in this example, if you know there was a dwarven civilization, and in the next hex you've come across a destroyed mine, that gives you a sense of history, that particular faction group, the dwarves, met some tragic end for whatever reason. That begins to build on the history that you're randomly creating. And so later on, if the players discover that there was some other mine that was overtaken by demons, then you might go, maybe there was this thing where the dwarves delved too deep and ripped off Tolkien and summoned a Balrog or whatever. It creates a sense of history within the world. Hopefully a sense of history that you create yourself originally rather than just ripping off an author. But, whatever works. If you do all this, if you make connections with what's come before, if you infer relationships and infer history, it will create a sense of continuity and internal consistency with the world, which your players will really appreciate, because it'll make them immersed into the world and it'll make the world feel real and it'll make the world make sense. Now, let's talk about some actual specific examples of how I randomly determined the hexes as the players crawled through them. This here is my Forbidden Lands hex crawl sequence. It was based on a whole bunch of different supplements that I had, because that's what I do. But basically, when you move to a new hex, when the party would enter a new hex, I knew what it was physically on the map, because I could see, oh, it's a lake, or it's a mountain, or it's whatever, right? Because that was already there. I knew what the geography was, as I said before. But then I would roll what the encounter or feature was, and I created this little chart based on the supplements I was using. So first of all, every time they entered a new hex, roll a d20. On a 1 to 3, they would encounter something from the Forbidden Lands encounter chart, which is a very specific chart to that world. If they rolled a 4 to 5 or a 6 to 7, I would use the Perilous Wilds supplement to determine what they found. So it could either be a discovery or a danger. So for example, if it was, say, a discovery, then what I do is I go to my Perilous Wilds here. Aha, discovery. I'm going to roll a 1d12 3 times, and I'm going to get progressively more detailed information. So let's say I rolled a 2 on a d12. Well, that's a discovery of a natural feature. Okay, great. It was a natural feature. And now I'm going to roll it again, and maybe I get a 4, and I get, oh, it's an obstacle. So they come into this mountainous area. It's a natural feature they encounter. It's a discovery, and it's an obstacle. What is the obstacle? 10. So a 10 is a ravine or a gorge. Okay, so they enter the mountain hex. They make a discovery that there is an obstacle of a gorge in front of them. Now they must decide, do we cross this gorge? Do we climb down it? Do we try and find a way around it? This gives adventure, haha, something to do, something for the players to deal with. That's an example of a discovery. Now, a danger in the same book, Perilous Wilds, again, available through DriveThruRPG and via my affiliate link below. If you were to roll a danger, same kind of thing. You roll a d12 for the category, and then you get progressively more detailed. So it could be an unnatural entity. It could be a hazard. It could be a creature of some sort. So let's say you did roll a creature. Is it a beast? Is it a human? A humanoid? And then you determine, let's say it's a humanoid. Well, what is it? It's orcs, let's say. Okay, it's orcs. What are they doing? You've got activity. What's their alignment, their disposition, the number of these tables are just fantastic. It tells you everything you need to know right here. So, okay, their activity, they're traveling or relocating. The orcs in the mountains are relocating. Ooh, that's interesting. Why are they relocating? Who can say? They're evil and I don't know, what else? Number appearing, there's a group, there's 1d6 plus 2 of them, whatever. Their disposition is they're fearful or fleeing. Interesting. They're leaving their place in the mountains. They're fleeing from their place in the mountains, so something bigger is chasing them. Boom! Instant session, instant thing for the players to deal with. Really, really, really cool. Then, if we go back to our hex crawl setup here, the other possibility is ruins and relics on a table called Wilderness Exploration, which I don't think you can get anymore. This is a really old school one. If anybody knows where to find this table, do let us know in the comments below, because I don't think you can get it anymore. But it basically It's a series of tables. I used the Ruins and Relics sub-tables here. Again, if they come across a ruin or relic, you roll on this table here. Is it a ruin, a relic, remains, vestige, remnants, refuse, wreck, skeletons, antiques? And again, it becomes progressively more detailed. So if you rolled a relic, so they enter the mountain hex, you roll a relic, and then, okay, we go to our subclass here. Relic, you roll it. What type is it? It's a tomb. So then you roll on this sub-table. It's catacombs. So they come across an old relic. It's a catacombs. It's not really a ruin. It's a relic. So maybe they're catacombs that are actively in use by something. Again, possibilities just emerge from all of the details that you roll. Anyway, you get the idea. And then, of course, here on a roll of 10 to 20, there's no encounter. So you would do this every time the characters entered the new hex. And I'd quickly go boom, 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 boom. Okay, it's a discovery. It is a gorge. It is an obstacle. It's a gorge in the mountains. Okay, now they're going to have to deal with that. And boom, there it is. There's what the players have to deal with, using whatever skills or talents they have in order to deal with it. So that is basically how it worked. You would just go through it a hex at a time, and they would explore things. But, as I said, every time they explored a new hex, you always kept in mind, what is the context? What has come before? How can you make connections with what they have already discovered? How can you infer relationships with existing NPCs or factions? And how can you infer a history, a greater history, a grander history of the whole area from that? And as you go through this process, you discover that you are creating an internally consistent world that feels real, and it feels like it all makes sense. And it gives the players an idea that there's all this stuff out there that isn't just totally random, that it's all connected somehow. Now, it's not really. It's only connected by the verisimilitude of the setting, but they could very quickly become interested in some random thing that happens, right? They find some ancient dwarven tomb, and in that tomb, this actually happened in the game, in that tomb, there was a mine, actually, a dwarven mine, and they found that there was a door with a key, a keyhole that they couldn't get past. And so they spent so many sessions scouring the land for clues that would indicate to them where this ancient dwarven key might be residing, and eventually they found it. So it's really cool. Eventually the players start to make their own adventures, and you as the GM just sit back and let them explore. Your job as the GM is to connect all those background dots as the players are exploring them, to give them a sense of a wider world, a world that makes sense. Quests and goals will make themselves apparent. I gave the example earlier of the dwarf armor smith who lost his axe in the dwarven mine, and when he hears that the players have explored this lost ruin, he asks them to go get it. They're free to refuse, or they're free to go. They're free to do whatever they want. That's the beauty of these West Marches style games. They are free to do whatever their characters can attempt to do. Our campaign was really successful. It only lasted about a summer because of scheduling concerns. But in theory, these games have the potential to go on for years and years and years. I have friends back home that are still doing a West Marches style game that has gone on for like 30 years or something crazy like that. Imagine the map that those players have explored by this point. It's just fascinating stuff. So the West Marches style game, is it for everybody? Of course not. But if you are interested in games that are about being driven entirely by the players, that are exploration based, and have a great random creation element to it, I heartily encourage you to give it a try. Go read Ben's blog post. He goes into great detail about how these things run, how they can run, how they're supposed to run. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you found this useful. And if you do have any further ideas on how you run your Sandbox games or your West Marches style games, please do leave a comment below, because I'd love to get a discussion going to see how different people handle different things. You know, it's great that we can use these forums to learn from each other and get ideas from each other to better our own games. Thanks so much for watching, and please do hit like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Also, consider joining us on Patreon or right here on the YouTube channel, or buying some handmade merch on our website, memyselfanddie.com. Thanks, guys, and we will see you next time.